Thank you. Hello. The strange sound you're hearing is an Australian accent, in case you're wondering. It's not as wide as it used to be. 5 years in the Netherlands has flattened out my Australian sounds, but they can still creep in. And the more excited I get, the more Australian I sound. So let's see how that progresses. It's really nice to see you here. It's wonderful, I think, to be out, don't you think, after 2 years inside, looking at each other on screens. One of the things I'm going to be talking to you about tonight is our relationship with screens. But I think also one of the things that the pandemic has taught us is that we're actually in the world more than we realised. I think a lot before the pandemic, people were talking to us or talking about us as though we lived largely on our screens. And I think what the pandemic showed us is that the screen is important and our phones are important, but also being able to take a walk with more than one other person is also important. Being able to sit in a park. Does anyone remember, any of the students from Utrecht remember when they were clearing us out of the parks at 10 p.m? They were breaking us up if we were in groups of more than four people. And I think what's happened over the last 2 years has reminded us that our digital lives and our analog lives are actually interconnected. We're not just living online. So I'm here to talk to you about my area of expertise, which is life writing. And I want to talk to you a little bit, or help you think a little bit differently about how the media that we use to document our lives, the things that are happening to us, and the media that we use to communicate with people who are important to us, shape our relationship to time, but also to who we think we are, and how that sense of who we are develops over time. So I'm going to talk to you about 5 things. I study life writing, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what life writing is and what kind of area of research it is. I'm then going to talk to you a little bit for the students in the room who began thinking about fundamental questions in the humanities and in scholarship generally. I'm going to talk to you about life writing as a way of making knowledge. And this is actually quite important also for our thinking about how we use media to think about our lives. So I'm going to talk to you briefly about why talking about ourselves and talking about our experiences is actually a recognised form of knowledge production, which I think is interesting for us to keep in mind. I'm then going to talk to you about my own obsession/interest in the intersection between identity, thinking about who we are, talking to others about who we are, and forms of media. This is my area of research. And I'm really interested in thinking about the interplay between digital technology and analog technology. So my fundamental commitment is that we don't just live online. As I told you at the beginning when I was reflecting on the pandemic, I'm very interested in us thinking about media and life writing as both analog and a digital practice. So I want to talk to you about why I think thinking about media is important when we're talking about life writing. I'm then going to get to the point, don't worry Niels, it will happen, where I'm going to talk to you about life writing and time. And I'm going to give you 2 ways of thinking about time from literary studies. One is to think about our relationship to time as being about the stories that we tell, and how storytelling, narrative, is a way of organising time. But then I'm going to ask you to think with me and think along with contemporary scholars who are also recognising that something is happening to the way we think about ourselves that is different to narrative. And I thought it was really interesting when Niels asked you what your media usage is, that most of the media that we're using are not narrative media. You're not writing letters anymore. Is anyone writing emails? Passionate long emails? Oh, good. Okay. So there are still a few people committed to longer forms. But one of the things that we're studying right now in the humanities and the social sciences is what's actually happening to our relationship to lived time because of the way digital media is with us always. And it's changing the way we communicate with each other, but it's also changing how we are present to each other, how we connect with each other. So I'm going to talk to you about the idea of being in time, or what we think of as co-presence. And then I'm going to suggest that one of the things we're seeing the longer we've been using digital media is that we're moving from an idea of getting a grip on time to actually learning to let go of time. And that one of the shifts we're seeing in social media platforms is a move to a kind of ephemeral use of messaging and of other services. And I'm going to suggest to you that that tells us something important about our relationship to time. So let's get started. Life writing as a field of study is, I think, of course I do, quite an interesting and fun field of study, because we're interested in everything from everyday uses of media, the diaries of women who went to school in a boarding school in 1923, all the way through to the most canonical forms of literature. So life writing studies doesn't just study artistic autobiographies and visual art by renowned artists. We're also interested in everyday uses of media. We're interested in how everyday people are engaged creatively in reflecting on and documenting their own experiences. So one way of thinking about what life writing studies is all the way from WhatsApp via hip hop to Knausgaard. We're interested in everything from the everyday to the highly influential and to the kind of epoch-changing forms of life writing. And what this means is that we're interested not just in what artists can tell us about identity, but also what everyday people are doing with their identities, what everyday people are doing when they reflect on their lives. And our basic assumption is everyone's thinking about themselves. Everyone is at some point wanting to tell someone else about something that happened to them, and everyone is engaged in some form of self-reflection. So life writing is a very broad term that refers to all kinds of cultural production. And the fundamental focus of life writing is anything that is non-fictional. But non-fictional is a very Anglophone term, and you would know this because many of you are Europeans. And in traditions such as French literature, but also in Dutch literature, we see traditions like autofiction, where authors write about real people, but they're writing about them in a novel. And this is something we're also interested in life writing studies. So one way of thinking about what life writing studies excludes is anything where the people are invented. But if it's an artistic work that in any way draws on the lived experience of a real historical person, then life writing studies is interested in it. And what that means is that we're interested in things like biopics, biofiction, as told to stories, journalism, as well as memoir, autobiography, autofiction, diaries, postcards, reality television, and other places where real life is recorded, edited, and presented. And the other distinction I'd like you to keep in mind when you're thinking about what I'm talking with you tonight about is that there's two different kinds of audiences for life writing. So life writing is sometimes presented to a group of strangers. It's the kind of, if you like, unlocked social media feed where anyone can come along. And actually, for example, on Instagram, where the goal is to have strangers engaging with someone's photographs and stories about their lived experience. So this is kind of public-facing life writing. But there's also a form of life writing and many forms of life writing that are focused on private relationships, on intimate relationships. And we're very interested in life writing studies in studying both kinds, but also in thinking about how those two kinds of audiences cross over. So we're very interested in studying how sometimes people write very intimate sounding work for a bunch of strangers. But also how social media can sometimes encourage people to treat the people that they love as though they're their fans. So it's not that these two different kinds of audiences are static. We're also interested in how ideas about audience are shifting. So as I said, our basic assumption is not that we're all narcissists, right? But that everyone is involved in some kind of self-reflection. Everyone is reflecting on, documenting and creating a narrative about who they are and what's happening to them. And we draw in life writing studies on insights from a wide range of disciplines that demonstrate that this is actually the case. So life writing studies draws on insights from the social sciences, from psychology, from cognitive science, philosophy, as well as from cultural studies, to think about just how important and fundamental it is that we're thinking about ourselves and we're able to communicate to others, this is who I am. So one way of recognising, if you like, the ubiquity, the everywhereness of life writing is to recognise just how many places in everyday life we are required to give an account of ourselves, to be able to say, hi, I'm Anna, I'm Australian. How many basic interactions are dependent on us being able to know who we are and tell somebody else who we are, and trade some kind of information about ourselves. So we tell stories to develop and maintain intimate relationships. And this is one of the most enjoyable things about making new friends, right? Is all those hours you spend telling stories to each other where you learn something new about your friend. You find out about the fact that they were bullied in high school or the name of their first pet. And this very small information is actually key to you building up an intimate sense of who they are and of getting to know them. But we also tell stories, very highly crafted stories, about our experiences, our achievements, and our personalities in order to get jobs. So it's not just that we have to craft a story about who we are to get that person to like us, but also a job interview is a form of life writing. When we sit there and we get that horrible question, what are your weaknesses? This is a moment of life writing, right? It's one of the most challenging moments of life writing because you have to pretend that you have no weaknesses because you want the job, but you also have to present a convincing narrative, right? You have to present some awareness, some self-reflection. We also tell stories about who we are when we're joining new communities or when we're welcoming new people into our communities. So what we know from a range of studies is that life writing is really important for social cohesion at the group level. That one of the most important things that happens when new arrivals come to a new community is that there are opportunities for people to trade personal stories. For a group, a new group of people, to be welcomed into the existing group through the exchange of stories, through the exchange of customs. But what we also know from psychology is that while we're involved all the time with talking to other people about who we are, we're also constantly talking to ourselves about who we are. And that one of the fundamental elements of psychological health and emotional well-being is a sense of continuity. Is that thinking you do when you're by yourself, where you reflect on things that have happened or feelings that you've had, and you organise them. And you say, okay, I'm not going to think about that anymore. You discard something, or you decide, no, that was really important. I need to hang on to the lesson from that moment. So what we also know from psychology is that we are as Neil said in the introduction, constantly updating our biography so that we can feel like ourselves. And one of the ways we know that this is very important for us as individuals, but also for us as a community, is when we think about what happens to people who can no longer coherently give an account of who they are. So one of the reasons, for example, we find dementia so traumatic as a community is when we see a loved one lose their biography. They lose a part of their life narrative. And one of the reasons that's so painful for the people that love them is because they are no longer recognised, right? And we see this as a community as a horrible thing when this happens to someone. And that tells us just how important it is, not only for us psychologically, but also for us as a community, that people have an ongoing sense of their identity. So life writing is an internal process that gives us a sense of cohesion, that allows us to integrate our experiences into an ongoing story and an ongoing sense of who we are. But it's also, as I've shown you, this thing that we're kind of doing all the time in a variety of different contexts. But one of the things that's also very interesting about life writing is that it's also one of the ways we as a community make and share knowledge about the world. So hearing stories about other people's experiences, receiving the life narrative of somebody else, is one of the distinct ways that we gain knowledge about the world. Eyewitness testimony is valued because we rely on someone who was at an event to tell us about that event. And we rely on them, because we weren't there, to give us an account of what happened. And what this means socially is that we believe that someone who has been present at something knows something that we don't. And their ability to tell us about that thing, we trust. So testimony more broadly, not just for eyewitness testimony in courts, for example, but testimony more broadly is also a very, again, everyday form of knowledge sharing and knowledge production. How many times in your week do you ask someone, where can I get a good cup of coffee? What's the best lunch place close to this place, because I only have 30 minutes, right? There are all these ways in which we just rely on other people's account of their own experiences. I got a good coffee around the corner. Don't go there. The sandwiches are always old. Go there. And we trust each other. We trust other people's accounts of their own experience, and we rely on them. Now, in philosophy, this is called social epistemology. This is the study, actually, of humans making and sharing knowledge through social connection. But it's also widely studied in psychology and in communication and cultural studies. And it's a unique form of making knowledge and sharing knowledge, trusting each other's accounts of our own experiences. So, of course, what we're seeing is that all of these practices I've been describing as embodied practices, right? I've been talking to you about things that we do when we're with each other, when we're present the way some of us are present now. But there are also some people, who are present online, right? Who are present to us now in a mediated way. And one of the things I'm really interested in is what happens to these practices that have been long-standing in human cultures now that they're being filtered more and more through media. So what I study, what I research, is what happens to our reliance on all these different uses of life writing and our sense of ourselves and self-reflection, now that media is becoming more and more central to our day-to-day existence. So the writing, the speaking, the messaging, the photographing, the videoing doesn't just happen. I'm interested in how it happens, why it is we are tempted to take photographs at certain moments, why we don't photograph others, but also what's happening to our sense of who we are as essentially our telephones, but also other forms of media become a daily part of our lives. They're no longer a thing that we choose to do, they're a thing we do. And in the humanities, we're always very interested in studying something the minute it becomes invisible. So the minute something just becomes a kind of habit and an assumed practice and feels normal in a cultural context, the humanities scholars get interested, because that's the moment we realise that something has been socialised to such a degree that it's become part of what we do without us reflecting on it. So I'm very interested precisely in the way in which media has become a kind of natural way to think about yourself through media. So I'd like you to engage in a thought experiment with me just for a minute to think about media and intimate communication. So I'm thinking about interpersonal communication here. It's your birthday. Happy birthday. Gefeliciteerd. You wake up on your birthday. What's happening media-wise? What do you expect? How are birthday wishes coming to you on your birthday? This is an audience participation moment. Don't leave me hanging.
I've got a microphone here and I can come to you if you want to answer this question.
With a postcards?
Birthday cards. Yes, they are arriving in the mail through the mail slot. Great.
Via WhatsApp.
WhatsApp messages, yes.
Facebook.
Facebook.
The old people.
Facebook from the old people, agreed. There's a hand right down the back.
Snapchat?
Sorry?
Snapchat.
Snapchat. Nice. Okay, so we've got birthday cards coming through the mail slot. We've got WhatsApp messages. We've got the old people messaging us on Facebook. We don't log into Facebook for a week, so then we feel bad because we haven't seen the Facebook. And we've got Snapchat. Anything else that's coming? Yes?
Via a phone call?
A phone call. I'm glad someone's still getting a phone call on their birthday. Great. And I think there was one more hand here. I think it is you, yeah.
People tell me through the air. Just tell me.
People just say it. So there's still face-to-face, so there's still actual humans. Great. Excellent. So this, yes, there's one more. Great, we're going now.
With gifts? Gifts?
Gifts. Oh, good. How are the gifts arriving? Do they come through a messaging service of some kind?
On WhatsApp?
On WhatsApp, yeah. Nice. Good, I'm glad that there's a GIF. Great. Okay, so what I'm interested in, and what I'm hoping I can get you interested in, is how each of these different forms of birthday wishing have a different kind of texture. They have a different kind of meaning. A birthday card through the postal slot says what? Yes? Says that someone has been thinking about your birthday. Organised, exactly. It says, I planned this. I thought about this beforehand. And then there's also the handwriting. So depending on how well you know the person, you might see the envelope come through and think, yay, a card from this person. Or if you're particularly lucky, you might not recognise the handwriting and think, ooh, who is this? With Facebook, I think we're sometimes perhaps a little cynical, right? Because we know Facebook tells us it's everybody's birthday. So a Facebook birthday greeting might still feel nice, but we may also think, are you just doing that to make the notification go away? But not unlike the birthday card, the GIF is interesting because the gift is chosen. We know that someone has sat there in Giphy keyboard, ideally, and thought about us and thought about what will make us laugh or which Muppet we most appreciate, and has chosen a GIF for us that actually reflects something about what they know about us. I think that's the best GIF usage. I don't know how you feel. So all of these different ways of wishing happy birthday bring with them a different kind of sentiment, a different kind of feeling of connection. And what I'm interested in is how the actual media form itself is part of that message. So it's not just that the message comes invisibly, right? There's something in the choice of media that is part of the message that we get. So this is what I'm interested in, is how media technologies from the birthday card and the postal system all the way through to the GIF contribute to the meaning that is made with a birthday message. Because every media technology has what we call affordances, ways of being used. There are particular ideas about what a media technology should be used for that comes with that media technology. So affordances in scholarship we think of as quite flexible protocols, things we can and can't do with a specific piece of technology. It's super weird if you get a happy birthday card when you graduate your BA. If someone hands you a birthday card to congratulate you for something, it will feel strange, right? The birthday card has a particular affordance. We use it for particular things. But that's a protocol. You can give someone a birthday card any day of the year. It's just it will feel very weird when you do it. And I'm very interested in how people adapt to the affordances but also bend the affordances of particular media. So one of the things that affordances do that I think is interesting is that they suggest a relationship with time. And the birthday card is a really nice example of this. A birthday card marks time for us. It marks one day every year. So we receive birthday cards on a particular day, but birthday cards can also sequence time for us. So if you have a particularly dedicated grandmother, as I did, you will get a birthday card every year. No matter how many times you move, she was very good at keeping up to date with my postal address. So a birthday card not only marks a particular birthday, but it can also sequence your life. A birthday card from the same person can begin to become a rhythm. So what I'm trying to track here for you is how media technologies themselves suggest a relationship with time. They can produce a particular kind of relationship with time. And life writing also suggests a relationship with time. And it's this intersection that I'm really interested in. And this brings me to the way in which we think in the scholarship digital media is starting to shift how life writing helps us engage with time. So there are two relationships to time that we have through life writing. One is narrative. It's this way of connecting experiences up into a story about who we are. One that we keep personal to ourselves, that is our kind of ongoing sense of identity and coherence. The other is all the versions of our life that we tell in different contexts, depending on what people want to know about us and what we're trying to get out of a situation. But the other modality of time that is emerging is this idea of co-presence. And this is a more recent relationship to time and life writing, where digital technology is allowing us to share experiences while they are happening with other people, just as our friends on YouTube now are sharing this experience with us while it's underway. But we can't see them, right? For you, they might not even be here. I don't know. Do you think about them? Are you thinking about them? The YouTube people? No. Sorry, YouTube people. I'm thinking quite a lot about you because you're the ones that made me nervous about doing this talk. So I'm quite comfortable talking in front of a room full of people. I like the ephemerality of a live talk. I like that I get to hang out with you, I make some jokes. You know, you admire my outfit. And then it's done, we go. You forget about me. There's no trace of this event, right? But the YouTube people and the YouTube channel mean that this ephemeral live event is going to be online forever. That has no ramifications for you. You're invisible. For me, not great. Got a haircut because sorry, not for you. I got the haircut for the internet. So on the one hand, we have people here sharing this live ephemeral event with us, but we also have a technology that is fixing this live event in time. And this, particularly in the context of higher education, is very new. And we still don't quite understand what it means or what it's doing to our forms of engagement. And I've just gone on the internet for all time talking about how I got a haircut for the internet. Not sure how I feel about that. So, the way we've traditionally thought about life writing is that it's a narrative form. And what that means is that we reflect on and document our existence and we organise it in terms of a relationship with the past. We think about who we are because of where we've been and what we've done and what has happened to us. And when we're thinking in narrative terms about who we are, we're focused on updating a narrative about the past. So, for example, I send a string of WhatsApp messages to a friend describing the really nice day that I had in Paris. And I maybe include a photograph and I tell them a little story about the day. And this is a way of knitting together an experience that I want to share with them to deepen our friendship into a little story. And this is how we've traditionally thought about what life writing is. And when I tell the story about my day in Paris, I'm organising the events into a temporal sequence. I got up, I had 3 croissants, I then walked, I then shopped, I then went to the Pompidou and I saw some great art, I then ate 2 more croissants. It's a sequence of events that tells the story of the day. And this is what narrative is. Narrative is a series of events organised into a sequence that uses the designation past, present, future. This is the relationship to time that narrative gives us. There is the past, there is the present, there is a future. And the narrative view of identity is that this is what we're constantly revising. I had a past, I'm currently doing this, I hope I will have the opportunity to go to Paris and eat more croissants. So the narrative view of identity, the traditional view of life writing, is that this is how we work, through storytelling and through narrative. What we think is happening is that digital media is changing this relationship, not only to who we think we are, but how we're engaging with others. So here's a WhatsApp message from my mother in Australia. Hi, Mum. Mum wants me to know that the birds I love are currently standing on the footpath outside the kitchen window. This is not a story, really. This is a moment. This is one of the ways that my mother says, you live on the other side of the planet, I miss you. The rosellas are here. Rosellas are amazing. They're bright red and loud. What time does it arrive? 9:44 a.m. for me. I'm not sure what time that is in Australia. So this is what we think of as co-presence. So when we use digital technologies for this kind of engagement with time, we're actually trying to bring someone over into something that's happening right now. We're trying to say, this is where I am. This is not a story. I'm not getting a narrative about the rosellas. I don't know what happened before or after they stood there. I don't even know what my mum is doing. I just know that right now she's looking at rosellas. So this is a way of producing co-presence, of being beside each other in time when we're not physically together. And this is the current research question across a range of disciplines that are interested in digital technology. We are trying to understand what digital co-presence is. So unfortunately, I can't tell you what it is. All I can tell you is we're thinking about that. We're studying that from a range of different perspectives and with a range of different case studies in mind. So I've deliberately chosen very calming, hopefully rather cheerful examples this evening. Partly because quite terrible things are happening in Europe at the moment, and a lot of the information that's coming to us about what's happening in Ukraine is through this digital co-presence. And just today, there was a news item published that warned people to be careful of viewing social media posts about the war. Because being exposed to direct footage from a war zone can be very upsetting. And psychologists have already come out and said, be careful. And this is one of the things that we're interested about with co-presence, is how we can be drawn into a temporal location with people we are not close to, and what results from that. What feelings come from that? What meaning comes from that? I'm being a little bit cheeky because I attended the physics lecture and I feel like I know what space-time is. I might not know what space-time is after the physics lecture, but I feel like I do. So one of the things we're thinking about is how mobile technologies appear to enable a different relationship with space-time for us culturally. So we can feel that we are attending or we are present at an event that we are not physically attending. So we can become involved in, connected to something that is happening somewhere else. And one of the things that's been studied quite a lot by media studies scholars is just how much social media platforms, the affordances of social media platforms, encourage this kind of continual relationship with time rather than a narrative sequencing. So the logic of the update, the fact that people will start to think you're dead if you're an active social media user and you haven't posted in a day, people will start to say, what's wrong, right? What's happened? But also the way in which social media sells attention is by continuous updating. Now this updating, this constant need to update, suggests that we're also changing our relationship to the self-reflection that we've always been engaged in. That we're no longer just pausing to kind of update our internal biography while we're washing the dishes every couple of days, but that actually digital media is asking us to be constantly reflecting on what is happening. That we're getting perhaps encouraged into a loop of life writing becoming what we're doing rather than living being what we're doing. So there's this blurring between being in the moment and reflecting on the moment, capturing the moment, sharing the moment. So, I never do this when I'm teaching. Please take out your mobile phones. I would just like you, I'm not going to ask you to share any information, right? This is totally private. I would just like you to open your phone and open the camera app and just look at your photo reel. Look at the photos. And I'd just like you to observe what you photograph. And also think about how many of these photographs are photographs that you took to then send to somebody, to someone. So how many of these photographs were in the service of co-presence? So what does all of this have to do with having a grip on time or getting a grip on time? The overarching story I've been telling you is that we think we're moving away from a kind of narrative relationship to time to a more co-present relationship to time in many of our forms of communication. And that media technologies, particularly digital media technology, is enabling a specific relationship with time where fleeting, ephemeral, everyday experiences like Rosella's landing on the footpath have changed from being moments that just slip by to becoming moments that we feel we should capture and share. And that also we want to share that experience immediately. We don't want to share it later that day. We want to say, the birds are here now. I'm wearing this now. Look at my coffee before I drink it. And that we're drawing other people into our time, into a moment with us at the time. And this considerably increases the frequency with which we are documenting and reflecting on what's happening to us. So we're moving perhaps into a relationship with time that is more split. We are both in the moment and capturing and sharing the moment at the same time. And therefore, every moment becomes a potentially shareable moment. Now, this is interesting, but one of the things that we're concerned about from a scholarly perspective is that no one can remember everything, that actually good stories, but also sanity, depends on being able to forget things, depends on being able to edit things out. So there is a concern, not just that narrative is shifting, but also what narrative allows us to do, which is edit, is getting eroded. But I think this is one of the reasons why we've seen the technology companies moving to ephemeral affordances, to elements inside technology where stories disappear after 24 hours. I think WhatsApp has this setting now, right, where you can set messages to just go away, which I think is great for everyone that's dating, because we should all do that so we're not obsessively rereading texts from people from 3 weeks ago. But why do we not want to be obsessively reading texts from 3 weeks ago? Because we need also to let time flow. We actually need things to recede. We need things to be ephemeral. Otherwise, we would just be crushed under the weight of everything that's happening. So we cannot grip all time, all the time. And this is what we're interested in studying when we study life writing and digital media. And that's my closing statement for you. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much. I have a microphone here, so anybody who has any questions to clear things up of the story of Anna, or any question that they otherwise would like to ask. Also for the people at home, I have my phone with me, so your questions can get to me as well. So you had a question as well, which we might discuss with the room later. So what is digital coexistence? So you might be thinking about that as well. So one thing, I think I forgot, what does ephemeral mean?
Oh, yeah. So that's a good question. Ephemeral means that something is not permanent. So when we describe something as ephemeral, we're describing something that can decay and disappear. So for example, archivists deal with the problem of ephemerality all the time. They're dealing with the fact that paper can degrade and rot. So to designate media as ephemeral is to think about the media that won't stay put.
Right. So I was wondering as well, you talked about different ways of knowing, and I know that you also compare media from different eras, or you compare different media, so diary fragments that are left behind, or letters that are left behind. They have a different problem than current day media, because I'd say that letters, there's a couple of letters left behind from the bulk of things that used to be there. But with current day media, you have the problem is on the other side of the scale. There's a lot of media that you can investigate in. So how do you tackle, is that a problem in your field of study? And if so, I guess, so how do you tackle that?
That's a great question. The way I tackle that, this is one of the reasons why the digital humanities has been invented, right? Is that one of the ways we're tackling this is to let computers do some of the searching for us as scientists. I don't use digital humanities approaches. I'm actually very attracted to things that are too big for me to read. I find that very interesting as a scholar. Because as a scholar of literature, someone who's trained in studying literature, I'm used to thinking about stories as having that arc of a beginning, middle, and end. And what I find interesting about these big archives is that they don't have that. So the way I study that depends on the archive that I'm studying. So I've worked, for example, on the Chinese artist Ai Weiwei and his Instagram feed. And that is something that I can never read in its entirety, and it's something that I can't organise into a story. So the way I approached that was to find a number of different ways to cut across the data. So I'm interested in how, for us as scholars, it requires a certain creativity in our methodology. So I was scrolling his feed, and I was making categories. I was working out I was essentially acting like a very slow Australian computer. I was sorting, and I was thinking, okay, how many times are we seeing pictures of his son? He posts pictures of his son quite often, compared to how many times are we seeing him posting images from exhibitions that are coming up? How many times are we seeing him posting images about the political situation in China? And I was counting. But I was also doing pattern recognition. And I think that's actually why literary scholars are quite good at this kind of research, because that's what we get trained to do when we close read. So it requires creativity and time, I would say, is how I do it.
Questions? Raise your hand if you have a question for Anna. The brains are still swirling. I have another question. So a friend of mine was sitting next to a friend of mine. He was looking at his Instagram profile. So all those pictures, the square pictures, 9 of them at a time, and then another. And he said, I don't recognize myself in this anymore. And he was pondering whether he could delete all of it and start anew. But he didn't. So I want to ask, what does the way that we use social media like Instagram do with the stability that we need to have in our narrative? What do you think?
I think this is one of the most interesting and challenging things, especially for people who grow up with social media accounts, because we change. And one of the challenges that social media presents to us is that who we are and who we were does not disappear. And this, of course, is why we have legislation called the right to be forgotten. But I think also at a personal level, and at a social level, this is one of the things that we're confronting, is these traces of previous versions of ourselves. But also the real challenge I think we're facing as a community is what weight do we put on the earlier versions of other people that we find on the internet? I think we all get very uncomfortable when we see earlier versions of ourselves, but I think that is actually partly a discomfort about not knowing how what weight other people are going to put on that version of ourselves. And I think that's a very interesting challenge for us as a society now, is not when do I delete my account, but what relationship do I have to the old accounts of other people? What weight do I give that? And I think we haven't quite worked that out yet. I think that's very interesting. And I think that policies and legislation like the right to be forgotten solves the privacy issue, but it doesn't solve the social issue. And I do think precisely because life writing is so social, that it's actually, we're going to work that out together.
So what do you think if you find out like an old YouTube account of a friend?
Yeah,
you find some old YouTube videos. Would you find it hard to accept that? Would you look at it? Would you be interested? Yes, of course.
Why?
I will come to you with now you need to answer the question too. Why?
Yeah, because it's a part of history, and it's part of who that person was at that time, and I think that's quite interesting to look back to, even if it would be for myself. Like you just said, it would be confronting or something like just in a negative sense, but I won't agree on that.
Yeah. So you feel that it can also have a very positive effect because you're having access to someone's past, and that's increases your knowledge of them, and that makes you feel closer to them, and it's interesting. Yeah.
Anybody has a different view to his? Yeah, I'm coming to you.
although there are indeed history can help people to understand people, but only keeping the history in mind sets people in stone, which makes them almost impossible to change. Because if you have held a view in the past, you might not have that view now. So where do you draw the line?
Anybody another idea? Something they want to add? Any questions for Anna?
Well, I have a question or a comment about authorship. So it seems that in the digital age we have so much more freedom to author our own narratives, right? To write, to choose ways that we want to write about ourselves in postcards and Telegram and Facebook and whatnot. While on the other hand, it also seems to be that all these formats make it for us that we lose some of our authorship. And I wonder how you feel about this. So this is a question I've been struggling with a little bit. How or where is our authorship in this question? It harks a little bit on the epistemological question. So what dictates the form that we use to write our stories? Do we have some sort of freedom, or is that the form that chooses for us what we do and how we do it?
It's a great question, and it links directly to the earlier observation that finding a friend's, let's say, 13-year-old YouTube video when they're now 23 can be a really positive experience, because precisely that child or that earlier version of your friend authored that. So you get to see them. But they also maybe didn't choose to give it to you at this moment. And this is precisely the tension around the internet as an archive, is how long its memory is, and how little control people have over when and how their texts are accessed once they've made them, or their life narratives are accessed. But I also think that the question of authorship raises this problem that you've identified, which is how much is what we're doing guided by the platform, and how much of it is chosen. And I think this is where, a broader perspective from life writing studies is useful, because one of the things that is kind of a given inside life writing studies now is that we always draw on templates to present ourselves in specific situations. So it's not that platforms have introduced templates where there previously were none, but the templates are tighter when they're technological, when they're actually built into the platform itself. So it's a continuation of the use of templates from analog or non-digital media, but there is a concern, absolutely, that one of the concerns, actually more than the template itself, is what the number of likes does to normalise certain forms of self-presentation and certain narratives. And we've all seen this cohere in a new platform. Every time a new platform starts, people are super creative. They do all kinds of weird stuff on a new platform. But only some things get traction. And the longer a platform is running, the more creativity actually lessens inside that platform. And people know that, I know to get a certain number of likes on my Facebook, a cat has to be involved. If my cat is involved, the picture will get much more attention than other kinds of content. And so it's also that feedback, how that feedback is changing the choices that we make. And that's also then enhanced by the concern of what the algorithms that none of us understand put in our feeds, because our feeds are not neutral. We all know this, that we can have people that we're following that completely disappear from our feed and we don't know why, and then you have to go to their profile and stalk them a little bit, like a number of their things to get them back inside your feed. And there's also the question of what the algorithms that are controlling the feed are doing to our authorship. And that, again, that's something that we're trying to understand now, and we're trying to study the effects of it.
You want to add anything?
Well, the other thing maybe that it's in the line of this whole problem is surveillance. We consider this problem from an individual perspective, but then you got the big companies who possess our data, and you can do things with. You got the likes, yes, but you got academic. You got this whole surveillance problem of capitalist surveillance. That seems to shape our narratives as well, and the possibilities what we can do with our narratives. That may be an even worse problem.
Yeah, so certainly one of the insights of this, of recognising that the platforms drive us to update all the time, is because there's a desire to collect data on us all the time so that our data points can be better correlated and sold.
Yes. Without our consent.
Yes. One of the things I did for Stories of the Self, and this comes back to Neil's question about the size of the life narrative that gets developed, is I went and I looked at earlier examples of where surveillance had produced enormous files on people, and I looked at Secret Service files collected during the Cold War on certain people, where just particular activists were surveilled for years and years. One of them was surveilled 2 years after he died. They didn't finish, the FBI didn't finish surveilling the African-American activist Paul Robeson until he'd been dead for 2 years. And there's these enormous files on these people, paper files. And I was interested at looking at how this enormous amount of information, what version of a life and what version of a person does it actually produce? And in the scholarship, sometimes this version of us is called our data double. It's this other version of us that is out there inside databases that's getting correlated with other people like us or not like us. And I was interested in trying to think about not just how the data double is produced so that people can make money from them, but also how the data double is someone that we have to learn to contend with. We have to learn to navigate the version of us that exists through our data points when that data double arrives at a situation where we are also present. So we see this, for example, in targeted advertising in our feeds, where we're like, okay, for some reason, this platform has decided I only care about socks. All I'm getting is socks, right? And then we're contending with our data double. We're contending with the version of us that the algorithm has decided is important, decided has money to spend. And I guess as a humanities scholar, what I'm most interested in is socially how we deal with this, collectively how we respond to that. What weight are we giving to our data doubles? Do we then go off and do some more Google searches to reset the data double to actually get the kinds of advertisements we want? Or do we just ignore the sock advertisements and are quite relieved, actually, that the algorithm has decided we're sock obsessed, because it's just a relief not to have to actually want to buy socks all the time. It's kind of nice to see something you don't want to buy. So I'm interested in this kind of broader social question. At this moment, I think we're trying to work out. I think governments and policy advisors and the legal profession are trying to think about how to structure the environment, the legal environment, the markets, in such a way that those data doubles are controlled. But I don't think it's just a question of the legal constraints on them. I think they're social beings. I think we know that they're social beings, and we're facing this challenge of what they mean, how we engage with them, and I find that really interesting.
Do you recognize what Anna says about the data double, that you recognize advertisements in a certain way, that you kind of see like, hey, this is shoes because I was just talking about shoes, or this is shoes because I just bought some shoes? How do you react to it? It's a question that you ask, but I'm interested. Who would like to give an answer to how do you react to the clues that you see of the identity that advertisers have of you, the image that they have of you? Do some of you try to get away from it, change the advertisements that they get? You want to answer?
I tried to block that all. I don't like it. And
Yeah.
I think I succeeded because I regularly get advertisements for bras. Then I'm sure that they don't have my profile right.
Yeah.
So for you, there's this sense of having to outsmart a set of technology, and you feel quite happy actually when you're getting the wrong kinds of.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah, nice.
Anybody else?
Over there.
Yeah, I'm coming to you with the mic. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm really curious because you talked about co-presence and that you share these pictures with your mother. And actually I have the same because I'm from Greece and I live in the Netherlands for 3.5 years. And I was wondering, from your experience and your knowledge, what do you do? Do you use them, or you try to avoid them and just use them when you need them? I know that that's a really difficult question, and that's maybe your whole research. But from your experience, what you know so far, does this influence how we construct our identities and how we tell the story to ourselves and how we feel?
Yeah, it's a great question. What is this co-presence, this digital co-presence, doing to who we think we are? And part of your question was, what does it do for those of us who are living outside of our kind of home cultures? But also, I've been very interested in how people have used it during the pandemic. What do I think it's doing? I think it's doing enormously good work, actually. I think one of the benefits of co-presence is in the service of intimacy and human connection. I think that for many people, this kind of co-presence, this kind of casual sharing, where you can let someone know that they're on your mind, or that you've seen something that they would like, is very beneficial to social connection and to intimacy. And I think that's why so many of us have just naturally kind of picked it up. In the longer term, however, I do wonder what it does to other forms of social connection, because I don't think we have infinite time and infinite energy for social connection. And one of the common concerns that's expressed in the research is that if we're spending more time being digitally co-present, are we then spending less time building relationships in the places where we are, for example? But also, what kind of impact is that having on our social skills? Do we become perhaps more comfortable messaging rather than speaking in person? And again, I think this is something that we've seen with the pandemic, with 2 years of just, has anyone forgotten how to make small talk, or is it just me? I've completely forgotten how to have a casual interpersonal, like just to bump into someone and have a short talk. I'm glad there's at least one person nodding. I've become very good at digital co-presence during the pandemic, but I did lose other skills, other forms of engagement through that. And I think that's one of the concerns in the research, is that the benefits can be seen, but also what gets lost or what do we not do when we're doing that. As someone who lives with an enormous time zone difference in their life, I find it interesting that it reminds me not only that everything in Australia is happening at a different time, but also the seasons are different. I find that personally, I find that very interesting, that I'm actually more connected to a set of seasons that I'm no longer experiencing.
There's another question here.
Yes. I was wondering, do you think that the increase in the accessibility of information influences how much faith and how much trust people put on the reliability of eyewitnesses?
I think that's a great question, and I think we see a very interesting polarization on this question. So on the one hand, we see a huge number of social movements, Me Too, Black Lives Matter, some of the political uprisings that were called the Arab Spring, where the sharing of first-hand eyewitness testimony was unwittingly trusted, taken as fact, as truth about a set of political conditions, and shared very widely and used to garner support for a cause. So on the one hand, I think we've seen just how much people do trust eyewitness testimony about specific kinds of experiences, specific instances of injustice, and that social media actually has enhanced that. On the other side of things, we see what gets clustered under the idea of post-truth, and the way in which people's personal accounts of things can be used to undermine verifiable accounts of reality, if I may call them that. So the way in which people's personal experiences become counter-evidence to, for example, scientific fact. And I'm deliberately being vague here because I don't want to be contentious, but fill in your favourite conspiracy theory here. And I think what we see on both sides is people's willingness and desire to see eyewitness testimony as reliable sources of knowledge, and people wanting to share and amplify personal experiences as reliable sources of knowledge about the world. The effects for knowledge, I think, are open to question, and it's one of the reasons why the post-truth era is extremely concerning, and people are working on that question of trust. But I think across both examples, what we see is people's willingness to trust a personal account of something. Sometimes when they shouldn't, sometimes when they should maybe fact check first. And other times because actually the eyewitness testimony that they are seeing confirms something that they feel like they already knew. I think this is what we saw with Me Too. I think a lot of women in particular were absolutely convinced by the eyewitness testimony in Me Too because it was confirming things that many women had experienced themselves. Did that answer your question?
I have a question of an online viewer, one of the YouTube people. So Boukje is her name. She asks question, a literary text is a space where a reader and a writer meet.
Yes.
So there is a shared understanding of experience that is created. She says, and she asks, in what way do other media, like Instagram, differ in creating shared understandings?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the theories about the reading of literature, I'm talking now about reading texts, like on a page, is that it's an incredibly intimate experience because you're actually hearing a voice in your head. And there's increasing research that shows that this is a particular kind of relationship with the material because you animate that material and the voice that is telling you the story is actually in your head. And that's not the case when you're looking at an image. You don't internalize the material to the same degree. So I would say initially that we have to recognize that audio-visual material and visual material is not as intimate an encounter as the reading of text is. So what does that mean for the creation of shared meaning? I think it can mean that with some forms of media we are more passive scrollers, right? So we actually have a slightly different relationship to the content. We take That's a strange noise. I feel like it's the beginnings of Godzilla coming. I don't know why I feel that way. So I think the first thing we want to observe is that it can make us take a more distanced approach to the material that we're engaging with. And that has all kinds of ramifications for what I was saying about the social uses of life writing. Because we're often engaged in giving an account of who we are to try and form a connection. But if we're trying to form connections across media that actually don't necessarily mean that the audience or the recipient steps into that connection, it can leave us in a kind of open space. It can leave us lacking that connection or unsure if that connection has been made. And I think that has a lot of ramifications. And again, I think that's something we saw in the pandemic. Did a lot of you do classes online during the pandemic? It's an extremely isolating experience, right? Even though you're looking at tiny images of other people, it's not like what you're doing now. You're not alone now. And I think that is one of the impacts of the screen media, is that we're not necessarily as connected. I hope that answers your question, Boukje.
Any final questions? Yeah.
I'm still figuring out how I should phrase this, but in your field of study, like life story studies, that's correct term?
Yeah, life story studies is good.
You can only observe and research the actual results of how people make narratives of their lives, but you can never actually observe their actual lives. So how does that affect your study of the way people narrate their own lives if you can only see the ending result, the narrative, instead of the thing they are narrating?
They are narrating, yeah. That's a great question. Thank you. So what kind of conclusions can we draw if we're only studying the end product? For me, the reason I'm attracted to studying the end product is because I think it's the end product that tells me what people themselves think is meaningful in their lives. So what they've chosen to record or what they've chosen to share gives me some sense as a scholar of what they have valued. So then I begin with what they want to give me, rather than beginning with the lived experience itself, with I don't know, following them around as an ethnographer might. And I find that, I think this idea of beginning with what people themselves tell me is valuable, is why I'm really committed to being a scholar of the culture and the texts. It's why I'm a humanities scholar and not a social scientist. Because I'm endlessly surprised and delighted and confused by what people tell me matters to them, but through the texts that they produce. And I don't know, I guess for me personally, as an intellectual and as a researcher, I like the feeling that I'm then collaborating with them. I'm working from the material that people give me, rather than producing the material. So I think it's also, from a scholarly and a research perspective, it's about how you want your data to come to you, if I can put it that way. And I genuinely do enjoy the discovery of what people have decided to save, just as much as I like then thinking about all the things that they must have edited out, thrown away, and not kept. So for me, it's also this, when I'm researching, it's this interplay between what has been saved, this is what mattered to me, but also what wasn't saved. And I'm interested in studying those two things together, because I'm trying to understand what people think is important.
Yeah, that was kind of my question. How can you actually study what people think is important if you can't see all the things they don't think are important? You can't really see what they actively chose to not show.
Yes. Yeah, so this is where I become a little bit like a detective. I have to infer. And there are some things that are very obvious silences in life writing. So there are some things, and when I'm teaching students in a longer context, one of the things I talk to them about is to be thinking about all the things that people leave out. And there are very obvious silences often. So people can produce accounts of their life and never mention their parents. And you think, interesting. And that might drive me then to do additional research around their parents, for example, and to try and discover through other means what has been left out and what the importance of what has been left out is. So it's not that I take on face value what they give me. It's that I take at face value what the life writing text shows me, and then I'm a detective.
All right, I want to end this evening. I want to thank you all for your attention, for your questions. If you allow me, I would like to misuse the YouTube algorithm and ask the people at home, and if they like this talk, they can give a thumbs up or subscribe to our channel. And may I please have a big applause for Anna Poletti.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much. Have a good evening. Next week, João Trabuccio Alexandre, a geologist, is talking about deep time, trying to get to understand what 1 million years means, or 1 billion years, and how having actually a huge view of the Earth, trying to get the grips with how big the lifetime of the Earth is, how that can actually help us in our actions today. And then the last meeting is in 2 weeks. Wouter Kruijne is an experimental psychologist, and he will talk about how our brain keeps time. So that's in 2 weeks. How do we know what a second is and what a year is with our brains? And we don't have a metronome in our heads, so it's something different than that. Next week is in English, geologist, that's what you asked, I think, right? And the week after that is in Dutch. Thanks for that question. So enjoy the evening. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.